Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to this session. My name is Namit. I work for Oxfam India and manage private sector engagement for Oxfam in India. And I'm joined by a distinguished panel here. My first panelist, Mr. Hans Christian from the German Embassy. He's been played an important role in development of or writing of the German National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. Thank you, Hans, for joining us in this panel. And this also brings in the perspective that when we talk about sustainability or business and human rights, there is a common role between the government and the private sector. So I'm hoping that you will be able to bring in that perspective on this panel.
Thank you.
I'm also joined by Anirban Ghosh, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of Mahindra Group. He's one of the best sustainability officers, I think the top 10 that you were rated. And he's playing a key role in leading the role that Indian companies have to play on sustainability in India and at several global platforms. Thanks, Anirban, for joining us in this panel. Aditi Haldar, who's the South Asia Director for Global Reporting Initiative. It's a worldwide program, and I think the biggest program on corporate sustainability reporting. GRI is a standard now, which looks at various aspects of corporate sustainability. And very recently, GRI also started working on the SDGs reporting. Ranjeeb Sharma from Marks & Spencer's. He's leading sustainability efforts for Marks & Spencer's in India, specifically on supply chains and decent work-related issues. So I'm very delighted to have a panel like this. The objective of the discussion today is to get a perspective of how businesses are looking at sustainable development goals, business and human rights. Reporting is a very important aspect, and therefore GRI and Aditi, your perspective will be very, very important for us. From the German government perspective, how is the government looking at business and human rights? How are companies responding to the National Action Plan? And that will be another crucial aspect of today's discussion. And with Marks & Spencer's and Mahindra Group, we are hoping to get a perspective of how Indian companies are looking at sustainable development and how is a multinational, a foreign multinational looking at this whole development. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and the stark difference as compared to the Millennium Development Goals is the role of private sector. It's been clearly defined that the private sector has a very, very crucial role in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. At Oxfam, we have done some analysis and looking at how companies are responding, what kind of policy frameworks exist. We have published 2 discussion papers, one that looked at globally how companies are getting ready for the SDGs, and more recently we published a paper assessing how companies have started reporting and acting on their own commitments on sustainable development goals. And what we found is, yes, there is a lot of excitement globally amongst companies, including Indian companies, on how to integrate and adopt the sustainable development goals. But we are still trying to find out what is changing. Yes, there are commitments. Yes, there is a lot of excitement, but how will that translate into action? So that's going to be a core focus of today's discussion. Try and see what needs to happen, who needs to play a role in translating those SDG commitments from companies into actions on ground. And within that, what is the role that civil society has to play? In India, we know for a fact that due to the corporate social responsibility law, there are civil society organizations who partner with businesses in a more project implementation mode. But the civil society has a much wider role in the accountability, in helping monitoring some of those implementation and also helping both the private sector and the government in plugging those gaps. So also trying to highlight what is the role of the civil society, how can civil society play a role in making sure that those commitments are met. So with that context, I would like to invite all of you for your opening remarks. And Hans, I would like to go with you first and trying to get a sense of your recent experience of working on the German NAPs. What's the perspective of the German government in going forward with the National Action Plan? If you could just tell us what were the challenges and opportunities discussed mostly by German companies in the context of how they are implementing or they are going to implement NAPs in Germany, but perhaps also looking at the implementation of German companies in India. So if you could just lay the context in how is the German government looking at the National Action Plan.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the development and the involvement of the German National Action Plan. I will try to inform you why did we do it, how did we do it, and what was the participation of different core groups in Germany. Why we did it? Because it was part of a coalition agreement by the, Germany always has coalitions in government, and so we were, as public servants, asked to do a National Action Plan, and I was part of a two-person core editing group writing the National Action Plan. And it was a process which lasted for around 2 years. We had 13 stakeholder meetings, 3 major plenary conferences. Your partner, sister or brother organization, Oxfam Germany, was part of the core group. We had eight institutions who were part of the core group. We evolved the National Action Plan jointly with them. So it was, there were 3 to 4 civil society groups and 3 business institutions. In the end, the civil society groups were disappointed, so were the business institutions. It took us, gave us some courage that we were not completely wrong, although we might acknowledge that there is a way to go in Germany. What are the special challenges in Germany? As you know, Germany is a major trading nation and a major industrial nation, the biggest industrial nation in Europe. And the specificities of Germany is we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies. And more than that, we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies who are active on world markets, which is a very specificity of Germany. We are not the only country which is organized like that, but it's very special to Germany. So we have to move jointly, and this is the very core of the action the German government is taking. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. How is the Mahindra Group looking at these frameworks in terms of, actually making sure that there is action on ground? So what's your perspective on that?
So we are a fairly large group with lots of businesses, as you know, and whenever something like this happens, consistent action is always a problem. So one way we've tried to bring consistency into the way we work is our sustainability framework, and we've created a definition for sustainability for ourselves, which builds these principles into the definition. And we know that the primary job of business is to build an enduring business, because you cannot have a sustainable business that stops existing after some time. So while you're building enduring business, we must also rejuvenate the environment. So the definition goes, sustainability at Mahindra is building enduring business while rejuvenating the environment and enabling stakeholders to rise. This is the definition which then translates into various forms of action, which leads to delivery on multiple SDGs automatically. And we ourselves are looking at what are the SDGs where willy-nilly our work, our business, primarily our business, and to an extent our social work, where do we end up contributing? Is it possible to even quantify what is the impact we're having on the SDGs? If it is, then how does one quantify it? And having done that, I suppose we will then ask ourselves the question that going forward, is it possible to have greater impact on the SDGs as a corporation? That's how we're going about doing this.
Great, thanks. From there, if I could come to you, Ranjeep, to see how a multinational, a foreign multinational is looking at sustainable development goals and the UNGP's framework, because you are a lifestyle focused company looking at supply chains. How do you look at it differently from how some of the Indian companies are looking at it?
So I think, if I may say, I think it has been a very interesting evolution. Like I think Marks and Spencer is 100 years old company, and it's an iconic British brand. And when we embarked upon our path-breaking sustainability program, it's called Plan A. Well, I mean, we call it Plan A because there's no Plan B. So the program actually looks at, actually we recently regenerated the programs in 3 major pillars. And if I may use the words, SDGs, I think Plan A existed before the SDGs came in, and some of the goals were already incorporated before the SDGs came into force. So it was very easy for us to align them because I think they go together. So the 3 major pillars of our Plan A is, especially last year when we relaunched it, the first talks about nourishing well-being. Second is transforming individuals and communities, and then the third one is caring for the planet. Now, between these 3 pillars, we have made around 100 commitments. So that's why I think your whole discussion about, like, if we talk about a time bound, or if we talk about objectives, or if you talk about fulfillment of those objectives, so we come up with the commitments. So right. I'll give you an example. For example, like last year in the Plan A 2025 made a commitment that by 2019 all of our products would come from sustainable raw materials. So in clothing, for example, if I wear this coat, so the primary source is cotton. So by 2019, 100% of our cotton is coming either from sustainable projects like BCI, Better Cotton Initiative, or let's say fair trade, right? Or we talk about, if we talk about man-made fibers, we're talking about polyesters, or we talk about modal from lensing, viscose. So there's one commitment. Maybe the second commitment from a supply chain perspective, which talks to our, in our second pillar, where you talk about transforming communities. We say that by 2025, 25% of our female workers in our supply chain would be in managerial positions. Again, we are talking about gender equality here.
Thanks. And now, Aditya, I'll come to you, because what GRI does, in a sense, provides the accountability framework, because it is a standard that I think 300 Indian companies are reporting on, which means these companies are using a framework to put information out in the public domain. And in a sense, a lot of the civil society organizations can use that information to assess whether companies are moving in the right direction or not. And you recently developed the SDG framework. So how has been the experience, and how are companies really, are they really excited with the SDGs framework? How are they reacting to this?
From GRI, as you know, that we've been in the market for 20 years now, and we are an institution who has pioneered the sustainability reporting framework, and now it is known as the GRI standards since 2016. So the primary aim of sustainability reporting is to actually look at what is the relationship and what are the impacts that any business organization needs to take care of. Yeah? And the relationships are important because nowadays we kind of use or misuse the word and the definition of stakeholders. Yeah? And then we also need to understand the impacts part.
Yes.
But what is happening in the reporting world, especially the evolution of corporate reporting, is that it has moved from financial traditional reporting to the shareholders. Yeah? And it is struggling really to bring in the non-financial parameters as well to the core business, yeah, of disclosure. Now, this is where I think the trade-offs and the conflicts and I think how the disclosure will happen starts. And it is not about just one department. There are many departments in a business organization who are involved in this whole process. So for the last 20 years, while we saw the evolution of the standard itself to become more and more applicable, we also see a lot of challenges coming from the businesses to really evolve itself to do business well, to imbibe these non-financial parameters into core business strategy. And there are different dilemmas about the word CSR and sustainability, which is always ongoing, right? So from GRI side, our stand is that whether it is CSR or whether it is sustainability, it has to be across the value chain. Yeah?
Right.
So it is from the products, what kind of materials, like he was describing, what kind of materials, what are the innovative processes that are used, to the delivery and the transportation to the end use, right. So this is our aspiration, our meaning GRI's aspiration. Now reporting and measurement should happen across all the social, environmental and the governance impacts or the turmoil which happens in all dimension of this value chain. But from our analysis, we see that that is not happening. Yeah?
Okay.
Throughout the world, I think most of the time what happens is the manufacturing unit or the corporate headquarter, discloses information about what are the policies, what are the management systems, what are the results which are there. Yeah? So many aspects of the value chain are left behind. Yeah? So this is one of the biggest challenge. The other big mission that we have is actually not to generate a momentum for only the report preparers, which is in this case the business organizations themselves, to use the GRI standard, but we would very much look forward to, and we do engage with the report users.
Okay.
And that is why I am really happy to be part of this panel, that you have brought in the civil societies who are actually, who can be report preparers also for their own organization, but in this case to look at how SDGs can be really imbibed and business, private sector can really contribute to SDGs. I think civil societies can play a very important role by using the GRI standard, and I will also describe a little bit on the 3 tools that GRI has done on SDGs specifically, to bring in a very constructive dialogue between private sector and civil societies. So what is needed is not just emotional outburst of why one of the SDGs is not being considered by a business, but in a very constructive way look at what is there in the standard, look at the tools which are already there, and then get into a constructive mechanism of dialogue which can bring in much more momentum and solution. Yeah?
Sure.
So the 3 tools of GRI are, we have the analysis of goals and targets. So it's not just the GRI disclosure, but it's different kinds of disclosure which are already available in the market to be in one place.
All right.
So a business organization can choose, or civil society can choose from there and use it and kind of assess, evaluate or dialogue, for improvement. Yeah?
Sure.
The second one is a practical guidebook of, handbook rather, of how measurements can be started, what are the ways that identification of important and relevant or material SDGs can happen, and how that report can actually bring in the impacts. Yeah?
Okay.
And the third one that we have worked on, which is already again in the public domain, is the focus on investors. How investors are expecting different business organizations to imbibe SDGs.
Great.
Because it's all about capital flow, and where will the capital flow happen if sustainable development is not ensured amongst all this. Yeah. So the last point I have is actually we are seeing that companies do report a lot. We have more than I think 50,000 reports in our GRI database, which you can all kind of download and read from different sectors across the world. But what we are seeing is that the disclosure is limited to the performance of the business, not on the impacts which are caused. Yeah. So this is where I think the struggle is, how the radar of accountability, or the scope and boundary of accountability of a business organization can move from just the controlled area of the business activity to the other part where communities and other stakeholders are also creating impact, right?
Absolutely.
So this is where the main struggle is.
Great.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. And also when I was talking about the assessment that we did, and even this morning in one of the presentations we were talking about some data in terms of how audacious the sustainable development goals are. For us collectively to really achieve those goals, we need a transformation of approach of everything that we are currently doing. So I think that's really a big area. And in our assessment, we found that globally, not just in India, but globally, companies are basically repackaging their existing sustainability practices and trying to map where it fits in which SDG. For Oxfam, I mean, some of the goals are really, really important. Gender equality being one of them, SDGs 5. Inequality, again, a very, very crucial one. And in one of the surveys, we found that global CEOs, as part of a PwC survey, global CEOs identified inequality as being one of the most crucial issues for business or risk for business. But when we look at business commitment to inequality, very few companies have actually made any commitments to inequality. So where we come from is, if we need transformative action, we do need to see in that commitments. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts.